Chapter 2. Farewell. 20 February 1108. They followed me from Lakewood, through the mountain pass to the middle road. They set upon me last night. I am dying. I know now the steel that pierced me was poisoned or cursed. I was dead the moment the edge broke skin. The fever is on me. The last of my money has gone to pay a messenger to deliver this letter. Look after my son. Please tell him I am sorry. Farewell, Lorenistel. The sun peeked over the mountains as Jaron lay in the bed not sleeping. Not sleeping was what he had been doing most of the night. When he did sleep, his dreams came quickly and they were not pleasant. Partly due to his own questioning, Arna had thrust so much information at him the night before that his dreams were scattered, unsatisfying and disturbing. Jaron squinted at the sunlight entering the bedchamber through windows set high in the wall and stifled a yawn with the back of his hand. Sitting up in the bed, he was relieved to notice that the dizziness had gone, leaving only a light headache. He shivered as soon as his feet touched the floor. The spent embers of the fire had allowed the chilling hands of a dying winter to reach in through the open window and steal the warmth from the room, leaving the smooth floor icy cold. He used the wash basin and chamber pot in the corner of the room and noticed the clothes laid out on the table. A note read, "Put these on." Under the note, the clothes glinted with intricate stitching. He held the shirt up to the window. It shimmered in the light and felt smooth to the touch. There were also pants, a pair of leather boots, and a belt. Jaron pulled the brown wool pants to his hips and tied the straps at the side so they wouldn't fall down. He then pulled the shimmering gray shirt over his head, fastened the belt, and looked in the long mirror. He didn't like what he saw looking back at him. His disheveled brown hair and green eyes decorated the face of a scared boy, smooth as a baby. He straightened, pulling his shoulders back as if he could will them to grow wide enough to fill out his new shirt. It looked too long. A king, huh? He sure didn't feel like one. He would feel more like himself in his own clothes, worn as they were. I look a fool, he muttered to himself as he started to unbuckle the belt. Yes, I have to agree, said Karas as she entered the room. Elian strode in behind her, his best friends at the library. Elian and Karas always seemed to be together. Jaron turned to look at them and could not believe what he saw. Instead of their normal attire, each wore leather armor laced with steel rings. It fit them so naturally that Jaron remembered the men in the market. Armor? Really? Jaron asked, looking at his friends and realizing that there might be more to them than just studies and books. Shouldn't they feel just as foolish as he? They did not appear to. Karas, who looked more comfortable in her armor than Elian did in his, sat down. Well, we didn't get much of a choice in the matter. Though I like the look. Arna insisted we wear it. He said the way, Karas waved her hand in the air, was going to be dangerous. We have some for you too. You two are coming? Both nodded. Do you know where we're going? Nope. Karas leaned forward, placing her hands on her knees. You don't look much like royalty, you know. Don't let that get to you. They're goofy looking. I think it's because they keep marrying their cousins. Arna told you, did he? I don't think I believe it myself. Jaron slumped on the bed, ears blushing red in embarrassment. The clothes and the attention made him feel awkward already, but being told he didn't look goofy enough to be royalty was the closest thing in the way of a compliment he had ever heard from Karas. Elian spoke up. No, neither of us heard from Arna. He paused, running his fingers along his collar where the armor had left a mark on his skin. I knew before I even met you. I was told 8 years ago before I came here to guard you. Jaron blinked in surprise. How many others knew of his secret? A woozy feeling came over him again. Was he still feeling the effects of the shade, or was this flurry of information causing this upset? One single thing fixed in his mind, holding him steady, keeping him from accepting. This story had to be untrue because of one undeniable fact. We have a king. And what is a king really? Elian chuckled. Seems we need protection from our own kings lately. Garand calls himself king, and he is jealous of power. We need to hide you from him. If he finds out of your claim to the throne, we will have trouble." "I don't want to be the king. King Garand has no reason to fear that I might try to usurp his seat." Jaren put his father's ring in his pocket. It didn't fit his fingers, but it did fit the seal and the letter still lying on the table. He had checked. My father might be alive. The thought put fire in his belly. I might even get to see him again. He had not seen him more than twice a year since his arrival at the library, and that had stopped 7 years ago. Karas got up from her chair and opened a leather bag she had carried in with her. She pulled out a coat of thin chainmail. "It doesn't look like much, but it should protect most of your upper body, including your arms." She held it up, and it reflected the beams of morning light against the opposite wall. "Arner made it himself, and I suppose it might have some magical properties, though he denies it. It's stronger than it looks." Karas handed the coat to Jaren and reached back into the bag, this time pulling out a short sword, sheathed in a leather scabbard. Elian and Karas fit the armor on Jaren, repositioning the belt so that it sat over the mail. They placed the scabbard and sword on his left hip. Over this, they dressed him in a hooded, dark green cloak. In the mirror, a brown-haired boy of 16, both short and thin, stared back at him. "Yeah," he thought, "this has to be a mistake." Filtering through the halls of the library, the smell of bacon drew Jaren, Karas, and Elian to the dining hall. The creak of leather and rattle of steel, rarely heard within the library, echoed quietly from the polished walls of stone. Such a change from the slippers and sandals normally worn by apprentices, the hard boots hurt Jaren's feet with every step. Jaren glanced toward his friends, Elian walking in front, and Karas to his left. He had never noticed how much larger Elian was than he. Jaren, at 5'6", looked insignificant next to Elian, 6'1". Even slender Karas stood an inch taller. At the long table in the dining hall sat Arner, steam coiling from the large cup in front of him. Piled around him on the table were plates with slices of bread and cheese, butter, one with bacon and sausages, fried eggs, and another overflowing with fruit. Arner sat with his eyes closed, nearly asleep. Karas pulled the plate away from him, and it slid noisily, waking the dwarf with a start. It was not often that a large breakfast was available, and Jaren ate his fill and more. However, no one ate more than Arner. Even as tired as he was, he kept pulling the plates around him to eat more. "Another egg, I suppose," he would say, or "just one more grape." Arner even put the leftover bacon into his pouch for later. He had spent much of the night ordering and packing the provisions needed for travel to Starkwall. When Arner wasn't locating the travel items needed in packing, he had been checking on Jaren as he slept. His eyelids drooped, and he let out a contented sigh as he drained his coffee cup. He was dressed in his usual attire, but had added a brown cloak draped over his shoulders. He gathered his hat, checking that the feather was firmly in place, and stood. "Well, let's not be here all day. We are headed north by ship to Brithiliost," Arner said to Jaren, "and then south to Starkwall." Rows upon rows of shelves lined the large square room of the public reading hall, each shelf filled with books of history, adventure, poetry, science, and even magic. No patrons of the library walked the light and dark gray patterns of the floor today. The dark gray tiles extended out from underneath each massive bookshelf by a hand's length, while the lighter ones placed in the center of each aisle looked now like an arrow pointing Jaren toward the center of the room, to the marble table set on a raised circle of dark stones. At the table, behind a worn and cracked history book, sat Ceres, master of the Library of Westmost. He did not look up as the group entered. Elian, walking in front, spoke. "Master, we're ready." Ceres addressed Arner. "I have made queries about the sailings today. Only one ship sails north this morning. Go to the pier and find the Aquilo. She should be ready to depart within 3 hours." He turned a page of the tome set in front of him and lowered his gaze for a moment before rising and closing the book. Lifting it, he walked into one of the aisles and placed it gently back into its place on the shelf. As he did this, Karas and Elian set their packs down and walked to the bookshelves on the opposite side of the table. They removed a piece of molding from the bottom of the case, revealing a secret compartment underneath. From this secret hold they drew 2 heavy iron bars, each an inch thick and 10 feet long. These they placed into the decorative holes directly under the marble tabletop. With effort, they pushed sideways on their individual bars. For a moment, nothing happened, but slowly at first, then with greater ease and speed, the entire raised dais rotated out of the center of the room on a massive barrel hinge. Under the dais, a stairway wound down into the darkness. "Has anyone ever opened this door?" Jaren thought. He was quite sure it did not exist on the blueprints of the library, having looked them over several times throughout the years since his apprenticeship began. Striking a flint from his pocket, Arner ignited the wick of a lantern. He took a small pouch from Saris, spoke a few quiet words, and having already shouldered his pack, started down the steps holding the lantern out in front of him. Elian also approached Saris. He reached out, clasped Saris's hands, and descended behind Arner. Karas motioned for Jaren to follow Elian. Still staring in awe at the secret door he had never imagined, wondering what other secrets the library held, Jaren took a deep breath and followed Elian down the shadowed stairs. Karas watched Jaren walk down the steps until he disappeared from view. Saris and Karas stood apart, remembering the fight from the night before. Saris finally said, "I don't agree with this decision. I know. I have to do this. I'm not afraid." "I am." Karas walked to the top of the stairs, where Saris stood, wringing his hands. She put her arms around the master librarian and pulled him close. Backing away, she wiped a tear from his face and said, "Goodbye, Father." The master, teacher, protector, and father, feeling aged and tired, watched his only child walk down into the dark. With another tear rolling down his cheek, he strained against the iron bars, closing the secret exit. The staircase wound down around the walls of a circular room. Light flickered from the lantern in Arner's hand, cascading over stone blocks and bricks, rough-hewn and cracked with age. The walls bowed out in the middle and were closer at the floor and ceiling. Much, thought Jaren, like the inside of a giant barrel. Karas crinkled her nose at the smell of mold. Elian complained, waving his hand in front of his face. "Yeah, we should have opened this years ago and given it a good cleaning." Jaren took a closer inspection of the walls. The stonework looked old, older than most of the city, certainly older than the library. Bricks came together to form intricate patterns of circles and triangles. At the bottom of the steps, Arner walked toward the wall and felt his way along it, running his fingers up and down, searching for something. 6 feet along the wall, Arner lay on his belly and inspected a brick in the lowest row. He stood back up, brushed himself off, stooped, and pushed on the brick. With a slight grating sound, it slid about a hand's length into the wall. Arner stood straight again, motioning to Karas and Elian to help him, and handed his lantern to Jaren. Jaren watched the three set their shoulders against the stones. "And 1, 2, 3. On 3, they pushed hard against the wall. With a grinding noise of stone on stone, a section of the wall slid backwards and then to the right, leaving an opening large enough to fit through. If the smell of mold had been enough to make them gag, the new foul odor stole away the breath of the companions. Far surpassing the previous unpleasantness, the salty reek of a sewer made the mold stench of a few moments before seem like a spring breeze. Elian gagged and retched at the base of the sliding door. Arner took a moment to compose himself, reached into his bag, removed 3 candles, and gestured for his lamp. Lighting the candles, he handed 1 each to Karas, Elian, and Jaren. "In addition to helping us find our way, the flame will help by burning away some of that stink," he said through the sleeve of his cloak. "Don't worry about the flame. The sewer's vented. The flammable gases go up the shaft." "Doesn't do much for the smell," Karas said, coughing. The way before them extended from the wavering candle light into inky blackness. Jaren could see that the tunnel was made of stone blocks arched at the top with a keystone so that the tunnel was widest at the bottom. He was afraid to touch the walls, fearing that they might have a coating of slime that would refuse to wash away. The passageway branched off in 3 directions, left, right, and straight ahead. Karas pulled a map out of her pocket, held it under the candle, and pointed to the tunnel on the left. At every intersection, Karas reviewed the map. At the last turn, Jaren could see daylight reflecting off water at the egress of the sewer. The sound of the ocean was unmistakable, sliding out and crashing back in. As they got closer to the exit, Jaren could see that the ocean was actually entering the sewer. During times of high tide, the sea floods these tunnels, washing away the waste, or the smell might have been worse, Elian remarked as he blew out his candle. A large, lichen-covered grate blocked the exit to the tunnel. Seaweed piled on both sides of the iron bars, which stood in 8-inch squares. A rusty lock held the grate tight. With a set of tools that appeared to come out of nowhere, Elian worked on the lock as the water of the bay rolled around their ankles. 3 minutes later, Karas said, "I thought you were good at this." "I am," Elian answered. "The boat isn't going to be around all day." "Do you want to try?" Elian asked over his shoulder. "I'm not touching that. Look how dirty it is." "That's enough, you two," Arner interrupted. After several minutes, with an exhalation of accomplishment, Elian relaxed and handed the lock behind him to Jaren. He pushed. The hinges at the top creaked in protest, and the gate swung up above his head. He strained under the weight. "Karas, get the other side," he said through his teeth. Karas squeezed in close to Elian and pushed up on the grate. It was light as a feather. Elian let go, smiling at Karas as he walked into the surf. Arner looked up at the sun and grumbled as he got his bearings. The sewer did not exit near the pier. They had to walk north in the water above the breaking surf for just under a mile before they could see even the sails of ships. They made the most of the walk, sloshing their boots in the light surf to wash away the grime, though they could still smell the stench for hours after. Karas kept looking at her hands and rubbed sand in with the salt water to clean them as she walked. Westmost was the halfway point along the western edge of the landmass. Even locked between high mountains in the east and the sea on the west, it had become a major trading center. Ships from the north and south would trade their goods and return home laden with commodities from the other end of the continent. Ships also came across the sea from Erlassen to trade. The pier was the heart of Westmost's bustling economy. The dock was 30 feet wide and was long enough to allow 4 ships to be loaded at once. On their shoulders, men carried small barrels and some pushed wheelbarrows filled with provender toward the ships tied to the long pier. Nearly everything transported by the ships was stored within barrels. Due to their shape, they were easy to carry, roll, and stack within the hull of the vessels. Shacks and carts lined the center of the pier. Fruit of every kind imaginable was for sale, and some sailors were haggling over a price with a young girl of about 10 for a basket of oranges. She was getting the better of them. Games of chance were running next to the fruit stands, and a young man shouted loudly as he lost, pushing his opponent in anger before being set upon by others around the game. The 4 cloaked figures received scant attention as they approached the hustle and hum of the pier. Wet from the waist down, they climbed the ladder and arranged their gear in a pile near the edge. Perfumed and sharply dressed prostitutes, both male and female, flirted with the passing sailors, convincing many to part with some of their wages and return for some time well spent behind closed doors. The prostitutes glanced at the 4 newcomers. "No money there. Don't waste your time," one tall and beautiful woman in blue muttered to her girlfriend. "Well, not today, Charla, but next time, I promise," Arner said, and winked at them as they passed, catching a wide smile from the woman in blue. Elian watched as they walked away and received the swat from Karas. After a quick bite of the morning's bacon from inside his pouch, and a swig from a flask he produced out of a pocket, Arner approached a man who was scribbling on a roll of paper with a sharp piece of coal, mumbling to himself. As Arner started to speak, the man lifted his hand to ward off conversation. Finishing his tally, he turned his attention to Arner, and the negotiations began. A few moments later, Arner stormed away and returned to the waiting trio. "I should push him off the pier. The bastard raised the fee. Do you have any money?" he asked them. The 4 pooled their coins and counted, careful not to let any fall into the spaces between the boards of the dock. Arner gathered the money and stood up. "Yes, this might do it." Arno approached the man again, and after a squabble, motioned them forward toward a ship. He grumbled as he led the way. "First mate of the Aquilo. Bet he doesn't live to make captain.